Okay, welcome to today's lesson on the Catholic Church and the Crusades. Our subtitle for today is Leading Us into the Age of Exploration. That's what we're going to be looking at today, is how the Crusades in particular had one mission, and the results of that mission ended up being something far different than what people would have previously guessed. For a warm-up question, why does religion play a strong role in the lives of the poor? Think about it for a second, then come back. One answer to this is that religion is so important to these people because they don't have a lot materialistically in this life that they really are hoping for something better in their next life. So, in short, these people are so strong in their faith because they want to make sure that when they die that they go to heaven. So, something interesting to think about. There was a Gallup poll performed a few years ago measuring the importance of religion, geographically speaking, in countries. And when you look at it in detail, you can see there is not a direct connection, or really correlation is what it will be called statistically speaking, but there's a pretty close connection between the poverty level of a nation and them being very religious. Our list over here on the left has the top 11 most religious countries according to this survey. If we're to go through and just look at a few of them, let's say, you can see that a lot of these standard of living statistics are not in their favor. Now, Egypt isn't as low as the rest of them, and Egypt was the number one most religious country on this study, so it shows that it's not a complete connection. But let's look at Sierra Leone, for instance, which is at 98% religion being a very important part of their daily life. Sierra Leone, 35% literacy rate. Their GDP per capita is only $900, which means that the average person produces only about $900 worth of business per year. The infant mortality rate is 78.38 per 1,000, meaning that about 8% of all of the children born in Sierra Leone in a given year, about 8% of them will die prior to the age of 2 years old. And the life expectancy is only 56 years old. When you look at that overall, that's very poor, considering that in America, our literacy rate is just under 100% at 99%. Our GDP per capita is $47,200 per year. Our infant mortality rate is 6.06 per 1,000 live births. And our life expectancy is 78.4 years. So we are far ahead of some of these countries. Interesting to think about in comparison. For our target today, and how does this connect to? Let's think about that as well. Well, we're connecting religion being important to the poor. If we get back historically, we're going to connect the poor people to be the serfs in the feudal system, which will help to explain why they are so religious and why they're so willing to go on the Crusades that we will be looking at in class today. So, for our target, it says, I can explain what the Crusades were, why they were taken, and how they indirectly helped to end the Middle Ages. Here's our target for today. Target's on there backwards. In case you're wondering, that's not a piece of paper, that's a rock. Getting a lot of grief about that today. Okay. Now, quick recap here. The Roman Empire becomes Catholic in 391 CE, and then crumbles soon thereafter. Why do we care? Well, first off, we need to build up an understanding as to why the Catholic Church is powerful so that we can understand how they can actually send people to war here. And that's our kind of first part here. Now, why talk about Rome? Well, because prior to Rome crumbling, all of the people become Catholic. And when the Roman government and military fall apart, the religion does not. So these people do maintain their religion, even after Rome is gone. The Middle Ages began and lasted around 1,000 years, from about 500 CE to about 1500 CE. This is a very, very debatable time span here. Just understand that it went for a very long time, and that's the time period that we are looking at as well. Europeans at this time are living in feudal societies with the serfs working as servants for wealthy landowners. Again, a lot of poverty, connecting back to a lot of religion. And as I'm mentioning, life is bad for the majority of the people in Europe because they're stuck on the manor. The Catholic Church was the official Christian religion. If we look at America currently, or even the world currently, there are many different branches of Christianity. You have Catholic, and then from there you have a lot of Protestant religions, whether it be Methodist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Baptist. There are many of them. All of them originally stem from one Christian church, which was the Catholic Church. At this point in time in history, everyone in Europe basically is practicing Catholicism. And it's not just about the serfs, it's also the nobility and even the royalty. So in reality, the church was very different than today because everybody is really focused on the church, giving the Pope, who was the head of the Catholic Church, the Pope had more power than anybody in all of Europe. They had wealth, land, and they even had the ability to send troops to battle and start wars, which is a crazy thing because we couldn't envision that today. I couldn't envision the Pope saying, okay, President Obama, send some troops into war here. That isn't something that really would fly at this current juncture in time. So, we talked about the ability to send people to war, and it actually does happen with the Crusades. The Crusades were religious wars fought between European Christians and Turkish Muslims from about 1090 to 1290 CE. We're looking at about 2 centuries here in which there are multiple Crusades that are taken. The goal of these Crusades was to retake the Holy Land being Israel, and a lot of really the birthplace of the Christian religion with a lot of things that occurred with Jesus, if anybody here knows the background of Christianity. It all takes place in this Holy Land, so for Christians it was very important, but Muslims also saw the land as being very important for them as well, so they ended up fighting over who would get to control this land. There are multiple trips taken, or multiple crusades, I should say. Some are successful, others are not. That's not really the goal of what we're looking at though right now, because remember, the subtitle of this was looking at how we get to the age of exploration, so we're going to stay focused on that here for a few minutes. When you look at it, and to understand like the whole traveling aspect and like what encouraged people to actually do this, it is weird, and you see a cross on a shield. I mean, thinking about a cross on a sword and things of that nature, it just seems very bizarre. But just do this exercise for a second to get the point across. If we go through and we paint in my wonderful PowerPoint animation, but paint a picture here of a person. You say, okay, average American, sweet beard. We do the same thing here. See the beard, and now we add a turban, and it's a different perspective. What a lot of people start thinking about are things like Osama bin Laden and terrorist, because those are, I don't necessarily even think it's necessarily prejudices, stereotypes, maybe to an extent, but it's just what's in people's head. It's in our minds and what we've recognized in the past decade or so since 9/11 with the concern about terrorism. It's the inability of people to really easily recognize and appreciate the differences in one another. Now that's in the 21st century. Let's imagine going back to the 11th century, and do we think that people would be very understanding of other cultures? Not really, and that's why it makes it really easy to fight this war, especially given that people are fighting, as they believe, for God, and for them, what's the risk? Well, you go to war, you fight, and you make it back, and you got to get off the manor for a while, and that's a positive thing, and you might have gotten to see cool things, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Worst case scenario is you go to the war and you die, but you died while fighting for God, and their belief was that you then go to heaven. Interesting thing to think about, and it really made it a lot easier given that they were fighting against people who weren't like them. When we look at the map here and you think about the distance traveled by these people, it is tremendous. So imagine a serf had never been off his land and he got to travel all the way across Europe. Now, while it wasn't a fun travel, they definitely would have gotten to see new things that previously weren't known. Things related to foods like salts and fruits and even tea. But then there's other things as well, other inventions that are brought back, and that's the one thing that's important to recognize. During the Middle Ages, there was basically no new learning going on because people did not have access to other people's creations. If you were stuck in France or if you were stuck in Spain or somewhere in Central Europe, you were stuck in your own land, so you didn't get access to all of the great things that were created by other people. Once the Crusaders start traveling throughout the continent, they find these new things, and then they bring them back. And this is what's going to lead to a big change, because once these items are brought back, the nobles and the kings want more. So to wrap up here, the Europeans failed to retake the Holy Land, but it was the first time off the manor for many serfs, and people began questioning the Catholic Church, which is kind of another thing that leads to the Reformation, a lot of the formation of these different Christian groups. New products were found, and something else was brought to Europe too that wasn't really ideal. That's the Black Plague. But this did create the need for new trade routes. So what we're going to see is these kings and nobles want to send people out on missions to go and explore because they want to find quicker ways to get all of this awesome stuff from these new lands. And this leads to the age of exploration. And we'll talk about these different sailors and where they went and the results of their conquests as well. So, we have a few mental sweat questions here that you can answer them, then come back. First, why were people so willing to take the Crusades? It was a win-win situation. They get to get off their manors, to get out for a little bit, and if they make it there, then they come back. Yeah, it was hard work, but at least you got to experience something different. And if you were to die, then you get to go to heaven. How did the Crusades lead to the age of exploration? Well, the Crusades whenever the Crusaders were going throughout Europe and even into the Middle East, they found things previously unknown to them, brought them back. It aroused the curiosity of their nobility and kings, and it led to these people wanting to fund missions of exploration to find quicker ways to go to get these items. So they send people out for exploration, and in the end, they are able to find some pretty cool things, even America. And what is the worst part, in your opinion, of going on the Crusades? The trek or the war? I don't think either one would be very good, but you can definitely have your own opinion on that. So that's today's lesson. Good job, and make sure you take the Blended Schools quiz.